Welcome to Politically Basic. I'm your host, Kyle Campbell. As we always do, we're breaking down the basics of all political issues and current political events so that you get to decide. Now, you all know Jonathan Haidt and Greg Lukianoff's groundbreaking book, The Anxious Generation. Well, Ted and Courtney Balaker made a film adaptation of that book called The Coddling of the American Mind. Ted's with me on the show today. He's a writer, director, and the co-founder of Korchula Productions. From Netflix hits to congressional screenings, Ted and his wife, Courtney, are behind some of the most talked about films in the country. And this one is fascinating and, might I add, gripping. Ted, I'm so glad to have you on Politically Basic to talk to you about the film and the issues around why younger Americans are so darn depressed right now.
Well, thanks for having me, Kyle. I really appreciate it.
Well, this is going to be a great conversation because now we're a little bit past the book and people kind of realizing what's going on here, and maybe that we should take another look at how we are allowing certain influences in our kids' lives. Maybe we should scale back some of their time on devices and on social media. So we're going to get to all of it today. So I'm really grateful to have you on. Lots to talk about. But just to kick us off, the co-author of The Anxious Generation, Greg, he's a friend of yours, right? And his own story and struggles motivated you toward this project. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, that's right, Kyle. My wife and producing partner, Courtney Balaker, and I have known Greg for a lot of years, and he runs a great organization called FIRE, which is all about protecting free speech on campus and beyond. And so, as you mentioned, he's a co-author on the book. And when I was reading the book, The Coddling of the American Mind, about 2/3 of the way through, there's this very gripping account of a man who comes very close to taking his own life. He goes into excruciating detail how he goes to a hardware store to buy heavy-duty bags and wires and all kinds of things. And he decides at the last minute not to take his own life. And the man at the center of that was Greg, our friend and the co-author of the book. And so Courtney and I had known Greg for many years, but we never knew that story about him. And we thought, my goodness, if someone like Greg, who is a very successful guy, a lawyer, runs this big organization, seems to have it all, and things seem, at least on the outside, to be going so great, and yet on the inside, he's dealing with what we discovered was very severe depression, and had been for a lot of years. And we thought, my goodness, if someone we'd known is struggling with this, and we had no idea how many other people are out there struggling with depression and anxiety and other issues, and their friends and loved ones don't know what's going on either. So that was one of the big reasons why we were drawn to the book. Of course, the book itself has all kinds of important big picture ideas, but then when you bring it back to the personal, it really kind of kicks you in the gut and has kind of a different impact, of course.
I think that's the most shocking thing as we are all starting to see the data coming out of this and hear really horrifying statistics about how many members of Gen Z are struggling with mental health issues, with depression, with thoughts of suicide or suicidal ideations. But what you just said is so important, is that this is not just completely siphoned off within Gen Z, right? This is happening everywhere. What's kind of the state of the mental health crisis? I know we hear that terminology a lot, but let's dig into that a little bit more. Amongst Gen Z, but just broadly, where do things stand in our country, in our society, when we're talking mental health crisis?
Yeah, the short answer is it's pretty bad. It's if you look at the younger generations, it's extremely bad. So yes, Greg is older than the people we profile in our movie. He's a Gen Zer like myself, but certainly all of us can struggle with these issues. It is certainly more pronounced for the younger generations, especially Gen Z, the generation we cover, and especially young women. And then especially within that group, young progressive women. That's the group that's most likely to have been diagnosed with anxiety or depression. Girls, just in general, just to give a little, detail to the scope, 30% of girls have expressed, of teen girls, I should say, have dealt with a major depressive episode over the past year. And that's up 145% over the past decade. The figure for teen boys is smaller. It's 15% have dealt with a major depressive episode in the last year. But that's an even bigger increase. So when you look at who's most likely to be depressed, it's young women, again, especially young progressive women. But then on the other hand, it's not like things are going great for boys. Their rates are not as high in absolute terms, but the increase in the rate is higher. Girls are more likely to attempt suicide, but boys are more likely to carry it out for various reasons. So the long story short, mental health is in a bad spot, especially for young people. But what we do with this movie and this whole project is we want to show that there's a way out, and our very compelling 20-something interview subjects, the characters we profile in the movie, show that there's a way out. Each one of them has been touched by this big problem in one way or the other, and each one of them has come out the other end to find happiness.
Yeah, the statistics are really, really surprising. So we know that in the past, whenever this issue has arisen, and somebody says, well, why? Why is everyone so depressed? Why now? Why these young kids? And the sort of blanket answer seems to be the internet. Or
Right.
we can look at the inception of social media and start tracking data from that point, and it makes perfect sense. But why? Can we go deeper into the why of what is it specifically, maybe particularly with young girls, particularly with more progressive women? What is it that is delving them into these depressive states more so than we've ever experienced in the history of this nation?
Yeah, it's a good question, Kyle. There's a short answer, and then there's the real detailed answer. So as you point out, a lot of people point to the internet, especially social media. That certainly has a lot to do with it. But again, it's not just social media. It's a very specific kind of social media. The kind, people may remember when, for instance, Facebook first came out, it was quite benign. You just used it as a way to connect with your friends and loved ones and tell everybody what band you were interested in. But then between about 2009 and 2012, these platforms started introducing the like, retweet, and similar functions. And that made everything, the possibility of things going viral. And so that meant that your life was much more on display than it used to be. So if you did something silly or stupid, it could be blasted across the world really in a matter of seconds. So we see young people becoming quite obsessed in a lot of times with social media. Roundabout 2012 or so is when we started to see this increase in anxiety and depression. And as you point out, it was a mystery, and we follow that mystery in the movie. People were saying, why is this generation so anxious and depressed? This is unlike anything we've ever seen. Certainly social media had a lot to do with it. But again, as you mentioned, it hits girls differently, because although boys can be very immersed in social media too, when social media came out, when smartphones came out, of course, the emergence of smartphones was huge, and it kind of added fuel to the fire of social media, and along with the emergence of new apps. But when the boys got their phones and they went online, they were more likely to get involved in other things, including video games. And video games have their own problems, but they're often not as bad as some people think. There's some, good aspects to them. I'm still not, we strictly monitor how our 10-year-old, for instance, uses video games. And so we're not keen on them in general, but they're not as bad as, say, Instagram would be for young women, because whereas teen boys and preteens are going online and a lot of times they're playing video games, a lot of times they're playing video games with friends. So there's a social component to that, which can be quite good. What young women are often doing is posting something and then waiting and waiting and waiting and waiting and waiting for affirmation. They want clicks, likes, thumbs up. They want people to tell them that they're beautiful and interesting. They play around with all these filters that so many of us have seen that can brush up our imperfections. And they're experiencing large amounts of FOMO, a fear of missing out. They see other people's lives and they look so much more interesting than their lives. Everybody looks more beautiful than they look, at least in their eyes. Everybody looks more successful, like they have more friends. And so that's part of the reason why young women have been hurt more by recent technological developments. Now, I'm happy to go into more details. It's certainly not just social media. And one of my bugaboos is that a lot of media outlets focus almost exclusively on social media, and they overlook other factors like the decline in free play, like what's going on college campuses, where people who should know better, professors, administrators, and others are literally teaching young people how to be miserable. And they're telling them, either indirectly or not, that they can be permanently harmed by words. For instance, they're teaching them that they're fragile when they're really not. All these things are chipping away at their well-being, at their happiness, and it's really a national scandal. So yes, social media definitely has a lot to do with it, but it's certainly not the only factor.
No, that's such a good point. And your film does a really brilliant job of this. The interviews are compelling because we don't know what's going on at Harvard right now unless we're there. But you have these young people with such bright futures. They're so sharp. They're so passionate, and they're not being given an education. They're literally saying we're being made miserable. So we're spending all this money and delving into all this debt and going to an Ivy League school or wherever they're going. And instead of being, given the foundation to go off and have a career and be productive and accomplish their goals, they're being attacked in a way. I mean, people call it indoctrination, but it's almost as if their mental, emotional well-being is what is being worked on there, as opposed to anything else. So I really encourage people to make sure that they see your film, because it really, really is compelling to your excellent point there. The film also talks about this term called safetyism, and we hadn't heard that one before. Can you explain to us what that is?
Yeah, Greg and John, the authors of the book, came up with that term, and it's really caught on for good reason. Because we've seen it, we've been living in it, we just didn't have a word for it. So safetyism is basically this obsession with safety, we all want to be safe, of course, but it's more when safety becomes an irrational obsession, when we are fearful of the ordinary rhythms of life, when we teach our kids to be fearful of the ordinary rhythms of life. So it gives rise to things like helicopter parenting, or also sometimes called snowplow parenting, where there are all kinds of different terms for it. But the general idea is that parents are often terrified to let their kids do things that they did all the time, like walk to school, climb a tree, play outside. The thing that Courtney and I and everyone on our team runs into again and again is, if you are, let's say, Gen X or older, and we've done just countless screenings and Q&As and written articles and done interviews, and again we hear from people Gen X and older how they were so free range when it was like, oh, mom said get out of the house, on a summer day, and it was like, 9 a.m. and come back by sundown.
Yeah.
And, we'd come back and we'd play in the stream and we'd have a skinned knee. Maybe we got in a little scuffle, but we worked it out and we came back and we were exhausted and happy and had, uh, sun on our cheeks. And it was great. And they talk about it so lovingly, and yet they often deny that same kind of upbringing to their own children.
Right.
And it's a very strange situation because in most regards, now everybody has, safety is very local, so you could possibly be living in a dangerous neighborhood. And so it's this, what I'm about to say doesn't apply, but for the most part, most of the things that we worry about have gotten better in terms of public safety, and yet our fear has only increased. And the bad news for that is that if you coddle your kid too much, you are not preparing him or her for the real world. You're teaching them to be afraid of the real world. They don't get to test themselves the way so many of us did when we were young. And those little tests, it could be as simple as climbing in the tree and you're a little bit worried about going a little bit higher, but then you do it and you get a little boost of confidence and you're like, oh, I can climb a little bit higher next time. And it's the same thing with learning how to ride a skateboard or swimming or whatever it is. That's what fun is. It's when things are a little bit scary, but then you figure out that you can do it and you enjoy it, and that process builds confidence. And we're really denying a lot of kids that experience of developing confidence to become independent, successful people in life. And I don't mean success necessarily in financial terms, just in human terms of being able to interact with other people. You can stand on your own 2 feet, you can take care of yourself, and you can take care of others.
Mm-hmm. Okay, Ted, let me ask you another big why question here. Because we all know that generationally, one generation produces the next, and based on how they were parented, they will then go on to parent. And sometimes we see that pendulum swing, right? So our parents' generation, they raised us very confidently. As you said, we had a lot of freedom. We experienced a lot of things. Our parents weren't as fearful or worried. And then we turned around and totally helicopter parented our kids.
I know.
Like fully. Why? What was it from that generation, our parents' generation, to us that made us so fearful?
Yeah, it's a lot. It's a good question. There are a lot of factors. A lot of these are what's sometimes called problems with prosperity, and I'm all in favor of prosperity, of course, but nothing is usually, very few things are an unalloyed good, and prosperity certainly is one of them. Once you get richer and wealthier and have your basic needs met, you start worrying about things that are not as, most people wouldn't consider terribly big problems, like if your kid can walk, a few blocks to get to school by himself. Another thing is just the technological differences. Now we know whenever there's a kid who's kidnapped or abused or any terrible thing that happens around the world, we can know about it in an instant. And previous generations just didn't have that access. And in some respects, ignorance is bliss. You had the rise in certain things like some of your followers may remember America's Most Wanted, for instance, where it did a lot of good in some ways because it helped catch some criminals. But on the other hand, it also gave the impression to many moms and dads that the world is more dangerous than it actually is. So that if the parents' worst nightmare is to have their child kidnapped, for instance. And if you think that's an ever-present threat, that's really going to change how you parent. And you think that you're doing a good thing for your kid by protecting him or her from all these threats, real and imaginary. But if, the trick about risk is not to, you certainly don't want to underestimate it, because you don't want bad things to happen to your kids because you're neglecting them. But on the other hand, we often forget the other side of the coin, which is you don't want to overestimate it too, because then you can hurt your kids in different ways, because you're not equipping them to deal with the real world. You're coddling them, you're bubble wrapping them, you're you're protecting them from any kind of discomfort. And it starts with the big fears like kidnapping, and then it trickles down to little fears like having their feelings hurt at the playground. And then
Yeah.
administrators in college pick this up, and they become mom and
Mm-hmm.
dad when mom and dad aren't there. And then they protect the kids from opinions that are different than theirs. And so they cancel speakers who they fear
Mm-hmm.
might ruffle the students' feathers because they don't square exactly with what the students believe. And it's really kind of become an inversion of what the college experience is supposed to be like. You're supposed to go and learn and debate ideas, not have your 18-year self just be bubble wrapped physically and intellectually. But unfortunately, that's what happens too often these days.
Mm-hmm. And it's pretty ironic, right, that we are trying so hard to protect, to bubble wrap, to coddle. Yet on the other side of that coin, we are allowing these kids to be exposed to absolutely everything on the
Right.
internet, on social media, right? So we're
Yeah,
doing
that's
them a disservice on the other side of it while we're attempting to keep them so safe.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And that's the big, John Haidt's really summed it up really well, saying that we've overprotected them in the real world and underprotected them in the online world. So
Exactly.
we've just, we've got it's the two sides of the same coin where if kids are online all the time using social media, then they're not outside. They're
Mm,
not interacting with their friends. A lot of Gen Zers have even a hard time just with simple things like eye contact and
right.
speaking with people in person.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's like bizarre to someone like me who's in an older generation. And so these two things may seem like distinct problems, the lack of free play and the increase in online social media use, but they're very related because
Mm,
one, uh, the social media pushes out the good things, the free play, and then on top of that, too many parents and too many administrators, counselors, people who often have good intentions, not always, but often, I would say most of the time, they think that the way to go is, again, to overprotect in the real world and then underprotect in the virtual world. So you're exactly right. We're letting our kids become exposed to all kinds of terrible
mm-hmm.
things, violence, porn, um, social comparison on steroids
Yeah.
through social media. We 10, 12, 13-year-old girls and boys didn't have to deal with this in previous generations. It's really, I'm always reluctant to say one generation has it worse than another because
Mm,
that's usually a sign of myopia. We all, we're all kind of wimpier than our grandparents, but we're tougher than our kids.
mm,
And that's probably going to happen for the next generations. But on the other hand, if you look at Gen Zers, my heart really does go out to
mm-hmm.
them because
Mm-hmm.
this was sort of like a massive social experiment that no other generation had to go through. They not only were they exposed to social media, they were exposed to it at a very crucial time when they were basically preteens, basically um, junior high school age. So those are very formative and important years. And if you spend your life online comparing yourself to others, um, going down the rabbit hole of social media, that can have huge repercussions for your future.
Mm-hmm. Well, we have these young people operating essentially as guinea pigs, right? We don't, we don't know. We're so grateful for research, for the numbers, for the data, for the stats that are coming from works like Anxious Generation, like Coddling of the American Mind, because we have to figure out where this goes now. I think right now we've kind of got the blinders on, like, well, we have a problem in front of us. What do we do about it? But we're also forgetting that these kids are going to continue to grow up and become parents themselves. They will be parents who are completely dependent on the digital age that they grew up in, right? They have this technological dependency, and now we're becoming even more dependent on AI to
Right.
satisfy every need of our lives. So it's amazing to see how much one or two simple technological advances have affected and impacted our entire, planet and culture here. let's talk again. I really appreciate you breaking this down as an issue. I'm a very solutions-minded person, so I want to talk to you about what we do now. But I want to ask you also, Ted, what this movement has done in terms of any legislation that's coming down the pipeline in response, first to the books and now to your film highlighting this crisis. What do we see across the political landscape and policy-wise that you think is going to have a positive effect on this crisis?
Yeah, well, there has been certainly in the last few years just a tremendous response to the problem of social media and lots of attention paid to it. Certainly the Coddling book, I think, had a lot to do with that. And Jonathan Haidt has really brought that to a new level with his more recent works. And so we see all kinds of bills, laws, policies schools are adopting to curtail social media use among preteens and teens. John recommends having phone-free schools, and we can get into the details of what people think that means and what he wants it to mean. So in one sense, at least people are focusing on the bad part of social media in a way they hadn't been in previous years. But on the other hand, the thing that's very mystifying to John and Greg and others, especially, for instance, Lenore Skenazy, who's a good friend of ours and who is kind of the queen of the Free Rangers. She's president of Let Grow, which is the organization that's leading the way for childhood independence to basically push free play and related solutions. So what we see is that people are very focused on one side of the coin, the social media part, but they're usually ignoring the other side of the coin, the need for more free play. And we think that's just a very interesting and vexing problem in a way. I guess you could say, you could look at it in a glass half full kind of way and say, well, at least they're paying attention to social media. But on the other hand, they seem very willing to ignore the rest of the problem, like the decline in free play, like what's going on college campuses. Although I guess in some regards, the madness that's being fomented on college campuses is getting more attention. But I think people are also missing the point in a lot of regards. We haven't seen the explosions of on campus like we did in 2017 with Berkeley and some other protests. But on the other, I say that, but then I'm reminded. I think to myself that the last couple of years we've had all kinds of turmoil over the Israel-Hamas war, and more shout downs. If I'm remembering this correctly, I'm quite sure we've had more campus shout downs in the last 2 years than we had even in what people think of as the heat of all this, which was more like 2017, 2018. So you hear people all the time say, oh, we're in a post-woke era, or cancel culture is over. And I just think that that's just such a short-sighted way to look at this, because for my mind, a lot of the problem comes down to what's going on college campuses. This is often where the bad ideas are planted, and where they're harvested and where they're dispersed throughout the society. So even though most Americans still do not have a college degree, they're affected by the people who went to who got their teaching certifications in intellectual monocultures, where they are taught terrible ideas like microaggression training. And so I think on the one hand, I'm happy that there's so much more attention being paid to social media, but I'm frustrated that the public debate has ignored so many of these other problems.
No, you're absolutely right. We're already seeing that happen. We're seeing teachers coming through higher education systems and getting their credentials, and they are a vastly different breed today than they have been in the past. It's really concerning. We have seen some good efforts in recent years, I would say, for people, leadership and school boards and schools trying to get their heads wrapped around this issue. And I have my own thoughts about, the phone-free school. I'll pick a kid up and they're instantly on the phone 2 seconds after they're done with school. They've just been with their friends all day, but now it's this sort of other part of their life that's so ingrained, is that they continue the interaction with friends long beyond the school day. They'll just be right on the phone. What do you think about viewing social media specifically as an addictive substance and the codifying of potentially putting an age restriction on it, saying, kids aren't allowed to have social media or be on social media accounts until they're 18. What do you think about that?
Right. Well, a lot of it depends on who's doing the deciding. Certainly, I'd be all for parents because they're closest to their kids, and making decisions about keeping them away from social media, at least delaying it. Greg and John recommend, for instance, not getting a cell phone till at least your child is starting high school, and holding off on social media till age 16. So those are good guidelines. Also having restrictions on the time per day spent on social media, and a lot of times that can be done talking with your children. And my son isn't on any social media, and my wife and I, he's 10, as I mentioned earlier, and and we're blessed to be around other families who are also very wary of social media, and so that helps a lot too. If you can be around other families that share your values, it makes everything so much easier. Because if your children's friends aren't on social media, then they'll feel less pressure to be on social media themselves. But you can even if they're on it, you can talk with your children and say, how much time do you think you should spend on it? Not because necessarily they're going to be making the decision, but oftentimes kids in some ways don't have a very good concept of time. And so they may make moms and dads, just a little, tip, a little trick for you. They may make your negotiating job easier because they may suggest something lower than what you might have suggested. And you're like, well, okay, I guess we can work with that. So those three things: limiting when they get the phone, when they start social media, and how many minutes per day. Really, it's unfortunately measured in hours per day these days. That they can be on social media. Those are three great ways for parents to get involved more than they've been. Then when it comes to schools, I'm all in favor of schools getting rid of the phones. I know there are different concerns about, what if there's some sort of emergency. So you can really get into the weeds with a lot of buts. We homeschool our child, so we avoid a lot of that part of the issue. And we're also in a community where homeschooling is quite prevalent. So that makes it, again, a bit easier for us. But those are some of the things that parents can start thinking about.
Yeah, those are great suggestions. You talk about building a community of families or a community of parents who are on the same page with regard to social media, and that's so smart. I just had a conversation with somebody the other day, another parent, and I was saying, hey, I'm anti-social media for the kids until they turn 18, because I do view it that way. I do view it as such a danger. And she was saying, oh, you're not going to be able to do that. That's really going to hinder your child socially. I'd rethink it. And my response was, I'd rather my child be hindered socially by not having social media until 18 than expose her to the potential dangers, mentally, emotionally, and even physically, by allowing her to have it prematurely. I sit on a board of an organization you might have heard of, Enough is Enough. It's Donna Rice Hughes's organization, and they're all about internet safety. But she always says, her saying is, where children play, predators prey. And we have to consider, too, this other side of this issue is that when you put a child or allow a child to have any kind of account online, you're just kicking down the door of access to people, catfishing or pretending to be another teenager or trying to get in contact or viewing photos, even if you have a private account, and you're putting that personal private information out there in one way or another. So again, you can tell I grew up being the helicopter parent because I'm like, there's this worry, Ted, and then there's this fear.
Yeah.
So yeah, I haven't broken out of that completely. Though I do advocate for a lot of outside free play, but there's
I hear you. My wife and I we're in the same boat. We preach one thing, but often it's hard to practice practice that thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and you're talking about hours a day that we're on. I don't think that people quite grasp how many hours a day we're on devices. Your phone will tell you now. So if you're like me where you work on your phone or you're streaming news or something, it's going to be like something horrifying. But I just had my good friend Allie Marie Smith on the show. She wrote her second book that just got released a few weeks back called Social Media Reset. And she's the one encouraging people to take a 30-day social media cleanse. And on that show, you'll appreciate this, we talked all through the stats of how many hours people are spending online, kids are spending online, and it's like an average of 7 hours a day, which is mind-blowing because you think, okay, you wake up and you get ready for school and you're in school until 3 o'clock and you have after-school activities, and then what are you doing? Spending every bloody last waking moment scrolling and on that phone and watching YouTube, and the YouTube stats alone are outrageous. It's like 67 or 68% of everyone with internet access, which is almost 100% of the people in this country. 2/3 of those people go on YouTube or access YouTube at least once a day. I mean, our consumption of this, our focus, our time that we are spending is just becoming completely consumed with this. We've got to stop it. We got to break out of this. Like it's not, I just don't see it going necessarily quite yet in the right direction. But here we are seeing how depressed these kids are, how sad they are, how they're putting themselves vulnerably out to the world to have strangers provide their value and give them affirmation and tell them how worthy they are. So again, I'm going on a rant a little bit, but I guess all that to say, this is such an important topic, and I'm so glad that you guys are, focused on this and we're talking solutions. So let's talk about raising these kids. If you like social media or you don't like social media or you want to do this, how do we now turn this train around and start parenting again? Because what we were talking about earlier is a lot of the parents are struggling with these same issues that the kids are struggling with. What would you say to parents today, who are our age? We've got young kids. We're on it. We're on social media. We use it for work. We use it for entertainment. We use it for social connection. And we're not those tough parents like our parents and grandparents were. We want to coddle our kids because we think that that's loving. Give us the good, hard, tough love direction here, Ted.
Yeah, well, if you want your kid to be able to deal with difficult people when they're 20, 25, to resolve disputes, to figure out problems on their own, to get a job, to be able to travel by themselves, then you have to do the right thing now, because we think that if we rush to coddle our kid today, then we've solved that problem. We've solved today's problem. They didn't get a skin knee today, so good job, mom. Good job, dad. But if they never get a skin knee, then what's going to happen when they suffer some real tragedy later in life? If they haven't been able to get a little calloused, then they're going to be like human veal. There was a book where the author used that term, and I think it's really apt that we're raising human veal. And of course, veal can't do anything to defend themselves. And you wouldn't want to raise your kids that way. And we don't think of that when we shield them from the skinned knee today when they're 10, 11, 12. We don't think of the repercussions later in life. But if you keep doing that, you're building a child who is not resilient, who is going to fold in the face of any kind of adversity. Even, that's why we see all these rantings and ravings from college students, and we think that they were like, they've fell to earth from space. They almost seem like so disturbed. But Mike Rowe, the Dirty Jobs guy, he said that if they're snowflakes, then we're the clouds. Like we parents have created these snowflakes. So I never really use that term snowflakes because I think it kind of passes the blame. Certainly once you become an adult, you have to take responsibility for yourself. But too often we parents are the clouds creating these snowflakes, creating human veal. And I think, Kyle, you hit on it, right in the lead up to this question, is that parents are doing a lot of these bad behaviors themselves. We have to start modeling good behavior if we want our children to exhibit good behavior. So mom and dad, get off your stupid phones, put them down. Don't, every time I see, and I'm sure we've all seen it, little kids in the airport or at a restaurant and mom and dad just give them the phone. I've seen, and I know we can all recount anecdotes like this. It was like a family of 5 at a restaurant, each one of them on their own phone, like nobody talking to each other.
Yeah.
It's just terrible. And as a parent, as a mom or a dad, you just got to put your foot down, summon the spirit of your great grandparents who were tougher than you and say,
who went
put
to
that
war,
stupid thing
no
down.
big deal.
Yeah. I know. World War II.
We're like, I got my
fighting
feelings
Nazis,
hurt.
Right.
No, you're so right. I was shocked to see a child holding a printed photo and taking the little fingers and trying to expand the printed photo, thinking it was like a TV, like a screen where they could enlarge something. But you can't really blame them, right? This is how we have packed full their sensory input of this very thing. And you're making my next point almost for me already, which is, we've got to parent differently going forward. We're modeling the bad behavior, but also I think that there is a new wave of understanding that we have failed to instill critical thinking skills in these younger generations. That has a lot to do with, of course, just how much time they're spending doing these things. But how do you think that we get back to that, to raising generations who have critical thinking abilities?
Right. Well, yeah, we need to teach our kids how to think, not necessarily what to think. Now, if you're a parent, then the what to think part is certainly a big part of your job, I believe. But for counselors, for teachers, certainly for professors, unfortunately, the art of debate has been lost a lot of times. So I would encourage parents to teach your kids the basic principles of debate. Just very simple things, even like why do you believe that, or can you support your reasons for believing in why we should have paper straws instead of plastic straws, or vice versa. It could be it could be the smallest, littlest things. You could have them debate about which is better, like pizza or spaghetti, and have them support their conclusions with actual evidence, with persuasive techniques, and you can model good behavior in that you are open enough to interact with ideas that you disagree with, to not lose your mind if you encounter someone who has an opinion different from your own. That if you believe, basically to inculcate a culture of free speech even at your home, because that's going to make your kids stronger. Because if you have good ideas, then they can withstand criticism. And if you come across a critic who makes a good point, then you've won again, because you can incorporate that point and modify your beliefs. So oftentimes what we see is that students are often coddled intellectually, and then they lose their minds when they encounter a different point of view. I think that's why on the one hand, I think protest is good and American in a lot of ways, but in a lot of times I shouldn't say we, I don't do this, it's the colleges and the administrators, they're taking away the deep, heady kind of free speech, of debate on campus, where you actually have to support your ideas intellectually. So that's all gone by the wayside too many times. And so what we're left with is screeching and howling students who are screaming slogans that they don't themselves understand. So that if you actually went up to them and asked them a very simple question, too many of them literally don't know what they're talking about. And there are all kinds of studies to prove this. It's a lot of groupthink. It's a lot of chanting the things that the other people are chanting. So when you're 18 and 19 and you're away at college, you want to fit in, of course. You don't want to be racist. You don't want to be a Nazi. And so you go with the crowd, even if the crowd doesn't know what it's doing.
I think that was the most important thing that we have talked about this entire interview, Ted, is you just absolutely nailed it. We are operating within a time culturally, it's like the perfect storm of this. During the 2020 election, the pandemic, we couldn't say anything without being offensive or harmful, or there was one way to think about things. And you talk about being racist. I mean, everything became racist. Comedy went by the wayside. You couldn't make jokes at some point. And so we got smaller and smaller and smaller and more restrictive. And I love what you're saying. I think that's so important. We have to break out of that now and be able to debate, be able to challenge ideas, especially with the influx of AI telling us, we have machines telling us what is truth and what is fact, and they're not right all the time. So these kids they need the critical thinking, they need the debate skills, they need a challenge, they need to not be afraid to potentially offend someone, they need to not be offended themselves, but they also need that discernment, because it's getting harder and harder to tell what's real now. No wonder they're depressed. Who can do this? Right. It's really hard. Right. It's really hard. Well, let me ask you while I've got you for a couple more minutes. If we don't make these changes, if we don't change our communities, our homes, our parenting styles, if we don't modify all these influences around these kids and how they're being brought up, I mean, where does this go? What does this look like? How do these kids survive? How do they become parents and parent? Let's predict the future in the wrong way for a second.
Oh yeah, well it's a it's a very difficult question to confront, because the present is pretty bad already. But if we just kind of kept going, if we kept riding this coddling train, you don't want to know where it's going to stop. I mean, you look at some groups like Young Progressive Women, and what is it? I'm not remembering the exact percentage. I want to say it's over 50% who have been diagnosed with anxiety or depression. Do you want that to go to 85, 90%? Kids are afraid to learn how to drive. They're afraid to go on dates a lot of times. These Gen Zers are now becoming parents. It's even just in the short time that the movie's been out, I've gone from thinking of Gen Zers as, oh, they're so, they're basically kids, to, oh my goodness, they're having kids now. And if we as Gen Xers and millennials and older generations really blew it with raising kids to coddle them so much, and if the Gen Zers continue what we started, it's going to be a lot more misery, a lot more dependency all around. I'd say dependency on parents, because the kids aren't independent enough to go out and get a job, hold a job. They think that they're too good to do certain jobs. And so they're reluctant to go to grab the first rung of the economic ladder, to do the things that so many of us did. You've got to make the copies, get the coffee, like prove yourself with little things, and you'll get more responsibility for bigger things. And then the dependency creeps up to government too. If you have people who can't function on their own, who aren't independent, they're going to look for other sources um, to be their moms and dads, and oftentimes that's government. And you see that in a lot of the support for certain candidates who, in my opinion, would merely continue the coddling into the political realm. So if we're going to have, we're moving in the direction of less independent, more miserable people. We're just going to get more of that, and it's going to have devastating effects for what families look like, for what communities look like, and even for what our country looks like.
Yeah, I think politically we want to be coddled.
Oh yeah.
We want our government and our political leadership to make everything okay and make our lives better, and maybe we need to snap out of that expectation as well. I think, Ted, this conversation, more than any I might have ever had on this show, is motivating me to make changes in my own life and how I'm parenting, and I gotta toughen up a little bit here, but
we all do.
it's just so fascinating. Like when I hear you talking about how we have to set up our kids for success, our parents did that by and large. They taught us and modeled how to work hard, do what you need to do to achieve your goals and make the life that you want. Don't gripe about things, like don't be a whiner, don't be a baby, pull yourself up by the bootstraps, life's tough. And then we turned around and we're like, I'll do anything for my kids so they don't have to experience discomfort. And it's just so fascinating from a psychological standpoint. So I'm greatly, greatly interested in what you're saying and appreciative that you're saying it and that people can hear from you on this. Now, you've just finished writing a screenplay for a movie called Troubled. This is really, really interesting. I can't wait for this to be filmed and to come out. This is a incredible story of really a brilliant example of sort of what the ideal is that we've just been talking about. Can you tell us a little bit about what this movie is going to be?
Sure. Yeah. So this will be a narrative with actors feature film based on Troubled, which is the best-selling memoir by a really great guy named Rob Henderson. His full name is Robert Kim Henderson. And I say that because he takes each of his three names from an adult who abandoned him. Robert, the name of his father, whom he never met. Kim, the last name of his mother, who was a drug addict and abandoned him. And then Henderson, the last name of his adopted father, who also abandoned him. So Rob grew up in the foster care system, was homeless for a while, bounced around to what was it, 9 homes by the age of 8. Faced any folks listening who are familiar with the foster care system know how bad it can get. So he faced all kinds of problems with violence, addiction. He almost drank himself to death, almost died in the bathtub. But he made it to. One day he decided to take to join the military, and he took the test for the Air Force, and he was hungover taking the test, but he did a great job. Turns out he's a very bright guy. So he goes to the Air Force, he gets into Yale University, graduates from Yale, and then goes on to graduate from Cambridge University in the UK, and now he's a PhD in psychology. So we like to say he left one dysfunctional environment, the foster care system, and entered another, the Ivy League. And so part of this continues the coddling themes of the corruption of the elites, corruption of higher ed, but it also adds very, very important issues like the importance of stable families. So Rob says he would give up his fancy degrees if he had a stable family. He said that we think of it as like, oh, we need to have stable families so kids graduate from college or they earn $100,000 more than kids from broken families. He's like, no, a stable family is a good unto itself.
Yeah.
You grow up feeling loved. You grow up feeling secure. That's the end. It's not so you can get a fancy degree. It's so you can experience love.
Yeah. Well, I cannot wait for that project to come to fruition and for us to be able to see that. And you're doing so many very important and worthwhile projects, and I thank you for that. Ted, thank you so much. Thank you for coming on the show and being so open and candid about this really challenging issue. We have work to do, and I think that you have very adequately and effectively inspired us to all do better in our own lives and in our community. So thank you. I hope that when Trouble comes out, you'll come back on the show and we can continue the conversation.
Would love to. Thanks so much for having me, Kyle. Take care.
Great. Thank you. And thank you for joining us for this episode of Politically Basic, where we break down the basics of all political issues and let you decide. Be sure to follow us at politicallybasic.com and at politicallybasic on all socials so you don't miss a single episode. And we'll see you next time.